leave off last week? How far did we get into the whole chromosomes and gene thing? Somebody have their last, that they told for type?
Okay, so we're talking about alleles and
Yeah.
dominant recessive genes. Okay, cool.
That's what I thought. I just didn't learn how to reminder, next week is the final exam on 9, 10, and 13. Come in, review. If you guys take that, answer any questions before we take the test, and then we'll be done with that. That's, Siri, what is the weather forecast for Parma, Ohio next Saturday? All right, Siri says next week is supposed to be on Saturday, cloudy, high around 42. So I don't think we're gonna have a blizzard. But do you guys believe Siri?
Yeah.
I've gone downtown to a baseball game and asked Siri, is it gonna rain? No, it doesn't look like it's gonna rain in Cleveland. And then get poured on, so I don't. As of right now, we'll give her the benefit of the doubt, so. Siri, what is the weather forecast for Parma, Italy next Saturday? Not even that much better, 46 there, so. All right, we'll just stay in Parma, Ohio. So anyway, we wrapped up section 3 and we started into chapter 9. And we started talking about developmental psychology. And we said it's a scientific study of all the changes that occur from conception until death. And this would include physical, cognitive, social, and emotional changes. Spoke a little bit about the whole nature-nurture debate and how this development occurred. Does it accumulate over time? Does it occur in stages? We then moved on from there, and we began talking about prenatal development. We broke it up into stages. We said there's the first 2 weeks, which is the germinal stage, and that germinal stage starts off with fertilization, where the sperm fertilizes the egg, and it becomes a single cell that all of you started as, called a what? Zygote. And so you stay in that zygotic form, or zygote, for the first 2 weeks as you make your way down the float into the uterus and attach, something called implantation. Then we begin the embryonic stage, 2 to 8 weeks after conception, and that's when all the organ systems of the body develop. When we get to the end of that stage, we then end up with something that looks like I said, a little person at the end of an umbilical cord, except the head is about the third as the size of the body, and weighs as much as a paper clip. So we spend the next 30 weeks or so growing, basically getting longer and heavier, because most babies on average are 20 inches long, 7 pounds. So from the weight of a paper clip, you guys start bulking up. And then I said a lot of the other details start to form, like fingernails, toenails, eyebrows, that kind of stuff. And as I said, hearing is the first sense to develop. And during this time, they've done studies where the mothers read to the fetus, and actually after the fetus was born, they tested the fetuses and they could remember as newborns what was read to them. And the fact that the mother read it to them, so it kind of shows that learning and memory is starting to occur even before a person's born. We then talked about that at fertilization, each parent contributes 23 chromosomes. We said a chromosome, so rod-shaped structure. It's found in the nucleus, and it's made up of protein and another molecule called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And we said that the DNA has 4 nucleic acids that are attached in long chains. And you can talk about the nucleic acids, adenine and thymine, which, you know, they always go together in cytosine and guanine. And they form different patterns. And that makes up sort of like your DNA fingerprint, okay? And then we all have different ones, unless we have an identical twin or identical triplets or something like that. But most of us, you know, we have our own individual DNA, and as I said, that kind of creates our own genetic code. So there's little sections of the DNA that we said code for specific traits, and those are genes. And all the genes that we have are called our genotype, and all the things that they code for are the phenotype, the physical characteristics that we see, or the abilities that we see. We then talk a little bit about genes, and that genes there could be different versions of genes, and those are alleles, A-L-L-E-L-E-S. And probably the most common example would be things like dominant and recessive genes, where if a person has a dominant gene for a specific trait, when they have that dominant gene, that trait will be expressed. Recessive genes are carriers, and they have to, you have to have 2 of them, one contributed from each parent for whatever trait it's going to carry for that one to be expressed. And I gave you the example like eye color. Eye color, dominant in the human species, brown eyes. But you can have, you know, different colors like blue eyes. But that's a recessive gene, so you need that gene passed on from each parent. And I think I showed you in the Punnett square that each parent, you know, could have brown eyes, but they could be carrying a little recessive gene. And so some of the children can be born with actually blue eyes. And I think that's where we left off. Does that seem about right? All right. Did I talk about the dominant genes? Most of them are, that you rarely see any kind of diseases carried on dominant genes.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, we talked about recessive genes. Usually things like retinitis pigmentosis, sickle cells, cystic fibrosis, those are all carried on the recessive genes. So, all right. So, let's say we get through this prenatal period. You got some good genetics, doing good. All right. However, as we go through this prenatal period, there are things in the environment that can actually affect our development. And one of them I want to talk about is something called teratogens. Teratogens. T-E-R-A-T-O-G-E-N. T-E-R-A-T-O-G-E-N. Teratogen. Teratogen is any physical, chemical, or biological agent physical, chemical, or biological agent that can cause birth defects. Okay? Remember, whatever the mother or birthing parent, however you want to put it, whatever they're exposed to, odds are the zygote embryo or fetus, depending upon whatever stage, is also going to be exposed to it. Okay? We do have a placenta. The placenta, it's one of those supportive structures that can block out some stuff, but a lot of the stuff can pass through. So if a person's pregnant, they gotta be very careful that whatever they're exposed to, okay, might also impact the development prenatal, okay? So they gotta avoid these teratogens. All right, so I said, well, could be a physical agent. That was probably one of the first teratogens that was identified. Okay? Back in the 1920s, when they started to experiment with like radiation and x-rays, they thought, wow, this would be a great thing. And so they started to x-ray pregnant women to see what the development of the baby looked like. Well, they didn't know the side effects, because radiation doesn't hurt or anything like that, but you started getting all these babies that were born dead and deformed and stuff like that. Okay? So that's a physical agent. Okay, so if you're pregnant, they usually don't have to do too much x-ray kind of stuff. Okay? They do the MRIs and the different things like that, ultrasounds, that kind of stuff, but they don't do the x-rays. Okay? Chemically, all right? This is usually in reference to drugs. Okay? If you're pregnant, you have to avoid lots of stuff. If you get sick, you get an ear infection or something like that, you have to consult with a doctor to see if you're allowed to take over-the-counter stuff. A lot of times they'll say no. You have to come up with some old school home remedy to kind of deal with some of this stuff. And it's because they're afraid that some of the chemicals in the medication or whatever may cause birth defects. If you're pregnant, they should tell you don't drink alcohol. And the reason for that is if you drink alcohol if you're pregnant, the child could be born with what they call fetal alcohol syndrome. And fetal alcohol syndrome is where the child may have some body deformities, a lower IQ, okay, kind of be like mild intellectually disabled. You can just tell, like, there's a certain facial feature for a lot of children with fetal alcohol syndrome. Like the openings for the eyes, they tend to be a little bit smaller, okay? They don't open as much. The nose is very flat. And this like red part here, this vermilion of the upper lip, it's usually not there, okay? Those are like distinct features in addition to some of the intellectual limitations that occur. So they, tell mothers, kind of avoid the drinking of alcohol. Once in a while, like if somebody's pregnant, 8 months or something like that, they're going to a wedding, they can talk to the doctor. The doctor might allow like a glass of wine or something at that point. But again, that's something up to the doctors. They don't know what is the safe amount of alcohol, and you really can't do a study where you create control groups, experimental groups. All right, these mothers, you drink a shot of booze each day, you drink a placebo. You really can't do that. So it's like a lot of times it's after the fact, case by case studies. So they don't know, and they'd rather err on the side of caution. So usually they avoid, or have people avoid alcohol. Another one is smoking. Okay, nicotine, smoking. Probably vaping would go into that same thing, because a lot of times if a person is smoking while they're pregnant, you end up with a child that's usually has a low birth weight. Okay, low birth is under 5.5 pounds. And these children, when they're born, are more susceptible to things like sudden infant death syndrome, where if you you put the baby down for a nap, come back and they're dead. Okay, just they're always trying to wrestle with that, trying to figure out exactly what the cause is and how to avoid it, but that's one of the risks. The other thing too is that these children whose mothers smoke, they tend to lag behind in a lot of cognitive, mental type development, where they, have issues with attention deficit, things like that. And I remember seeing a huge study where they looked at like thousands of cases where the mother smoked during the pregnancy compared to thousands of, didn't. And they saw, on average, all right, in the individuals whose mothers smoked, their IQ was like 10 points lower compared to the non-smoking group, okay? It's not huge, but I mean, it can make a difference. And then, you look at the standard deviation, some of those IQs are like 25, 30 points lower. Okay, so that's another one they kind of tell you to avoid. And there's like tons of other chemicals. Can't eat a lot of fish because of mercury, and lunch meat with the nitrites and all that other stuff. So there are chemicals that you have to be careful of, be cognizant of, because they might lead to birth defects. Biologically, okay, there are different viruses and bacteria that can also cause these types of birth defects. Okay, not to clean the litter box. Right? If you have a pet cat, let somebody else do it, because in the poop there's a virus in there called Toxoplasmosis that can cause some damage. So you got to avoid that. And there's other ones as well. Okay, which brings me to a point. One thing that is very important to understand in development. Okay, and this ties into these teratogens. Is that I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, there's a lot of rapid changes occurring during that embryonic and germinal period, okay? And that's very important in understanding how these teratogens actually cause their damage, okay? In development, there's something called a critical period. A critical period is a window of time. It's a period of time where development is impacted by environmental influences. Development is impacted or affected by environmental influences. Now this was first discovered in the 1930s. There was a guy in Europe, his name was Konrad Lorenz. And Konrad Lorenz was doing research with baby geese, little goslings. And what he discovered was that when that little baby goose, that gosling, comes out of the egg, all right, it follows the first moving object it sees. Usually out in nature, what's that first moving object?
Its mother?
The mother goose, right? So you see, if you just go out here in front of the building sometimes, like in the summertime, you'll see like a mother goose walking, and there'll be all these little goslings, babies following her. Okay? The one day I was sitting on the bench up front there, waiting for my bus, and mother goose comes by with like her babies, her goslings or whatever, and all of a sudden they start attacking my shoestrings. And with mother goose there, I wasn't going to move, so I just let them, do whatever until they figured out they couldn't eat them, and then they moved on or whatever. All right. So what Konrad Lorenz did to kind of show this was for some of them that were hatched, he rolled a ball in front of them, and so they followed that ball everywhere. One of them, some of them hatched, and he had a toy truck on a string, and he pulled it past them, and they followed that toy truck everywhere. okay? So this is a type of learning that's called imprinting, all right? Here's where he discovered the critical period. This has to happen like within the first 24 to 36 hours. If the baby goose, if the little gosling sees nothing moving, it will follow nothing, okay? It's gotta see something moving to follow it within that first 24 to 36 hours. If that period passes, it doesn't matter now if the mother goose walks by, it will not follow it. So there's a critical period of this imprinting following the first moving object it sees from like 24 to 36 hours after it hatches. After that, nothing. So if it's out in the wild, odds are it's gonna, probably die or get eaten by some other animal or something like that.
Wow.
Okay, so that's a critical period. That was like one of the first ones. We see this sometimes even like in humans, all right? If let's say a child before adolescence, all right, let's say moves here from another country. They move here from, I don't know, Germany, okay? A lot of times, if it's pre-adolescence, they'll lose their German accent. Okay. However, if it's like past adolescence, they'll keep it, and they'll never get rid of it. Think of like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He came here, I think, from Germany or Austria or something like that. Came to the United States when he was like 18, 19 years old. He will never get rid of that accent. If he came here when he was 8 or 9, he probably wouldn't have one. And the same thing applies like even within the United States itself. You have people that live down south with a southern accent. If they move to Chicago and they're 19 years old, they may keep that southern accent the rest of their lives. Okay? If they move here when they're like 7 to Chicago or somewhere in a northern city, they may eventually lose that accent. Okay? So there's like critical periods for that. All right. The same applies for these teratogens. Most of these teratogens, these physical, chemical, biological agents that cause birth defects, do their damage in the first 2 months. Okay, during that germinal period, during that embryonic period. Because remember I said, there's a ton of rapid cell division and things going on. The other thing too is somebody may not know they're pregnant. And if they're going out partying or they smoke or do different things like that, they may not know right away. So those first 2 months are like critical because of all the changes that are occurring. The way this kind of came about was in the 1940s. There was an eye doctor, an ophthalmologist. I can't remember his first name. His last name was Greg. It was Dr. Greg. And Dr. Greg, in the 1940s, started to see all these babies born with cataracts. That like covering over the lens kind of thing. He'd get one once in a while, but it seemed like there was quite a few of them being born with these cataracts. And some of them had cataracts and also had hearing loss. Some of them had cataracts, hearing loss, and a heart defect. Some had all 3, some had 2 out of 3, some had 1. So he went back to do some research, and what he found was that in the prior year, in Australia, where all this was taking place, there was a huge outbreak of rubella, more commonly known as German measles. And what they found was that if a woman contracted rubella prior to week 12 of the pregnancy, the child would end up with one of these defects. And they broke it down. Where it's like if the mother got rubella or German measles in the first 4 weeks, it would have this defect. If it was 4 to 8 weeks, it would have this defect. 8 to 12, this defect.
Interesting.
Once we pass that 12-week mark, if they caught German measles, nothing. No birth defects. So there's like this critical period. It seems like it's those first couple months where you're gonna get, slammed if you, end up, getting exposed to one of these agents or a couple of them or something like that. There's still some that will hit you later on, like toward the end of the pregnancy. You gotta watch for like herpes, genital herpes and that kind of stuff, because that could cause blindness in the child. There's another one, I can't remember what it is. But there's a couple of them that will catch you later. But most of the teratogens that we're talking about are gonna be doing their heavy duty damage in the germinal embryonic periods, and maybe at the front end of the fetal period. Okay, so that's why they tell you to avoid a lot of this stuff, it just increases the probability that you're not going to end up with any types of birth defects or anything like that. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. Let's say we avoid all those teratogens. We got some good genes. We're doing all right here. We're born now. So we got a newborn, a neonate. Born today, December 7th. Now, does this baby really have any abilities at this point? Can they do anything besides sleep, poop, and eat?
Cry?
Pardon me?
Cry?
Cry, okay? So, we know that they can communicate, okay? That's their way of communicating, through crying. And as a parent, you start to identify the different types of cries over time. Maybe not when they're first born, but there's a cry when they're in pain. You can tell that one. A cry when they have a wet diaper. A cry when they're hungry. A cry when they're sleepy. A cry, is it pain, wet diaper? Where do they go? Hungry, sleepy. And then there's the cry because I guess because I can't think of anything else to do. It drives, as a parent, drives you crazy. You're looking in their ear, their mouth, sticking your finger in their diaper to see if they need to be changed. And it's, nothing or whatever. But you could tell. I mean, even like young kids, if you're anywhere, all right, let's say it's somewhere quiet. Let's say you go to church or somewhere, or, somewhere where it's kind of quiet, and there's a kid playing, and or even like a 1 or 2 year old, and they bang their head against something, so you hear that. Okay, then you hear the kind of noise. Then what's going on? Why you're not hearing anything? Because they're sucking in a bunch of air. Because the next thing you're probably going to hear is, that's not a hunger cry. Okay? That's a pain cry. Okay? So there's different types of cries that develop. So babies use that to communicate. Okay? Within the first month, they will learn to coo. Make those little vowel sounds. And usually by 6 months, they will babble, where they start making the consonant sounds, like those kind of sounds. What's kind of interesting is between 6 months and 12 months of age, children will babble in all the different sounds of all the languages. Language is made up of little sound noises. They call them phonemes. And I think there's like a couple hundred of them that make up all the languages of the world. And during this 6 to 12 months, they've recorded, the different verbal noises that children are making. And they'll babble in all these different sounds. But what happens is that it seems like over that time, the brain will go through a process of almost like pruning. where it will start to cut out the sounds that aren't of their own language. So if you're growing up, let's say in the United States, I think we got like 40 to 45 of these phonemes that make up the English language out of the 200. Because of those sounds around you, let's say in your house you only speak English, a lot of those other sounds are gonna be cut out as the brain is pruned. So by the time you're like 1 year of age, okay, all the sounds you're gonna be making are of your native language, of all those sounds around you. Okay. So, you know, for example, like in the United States, we have the L sound. If I said to you guys, hey, look over there, okay? In Japanese, they don't have that sound. They can't make that sound, that L sound. They would say like, look over there. But a Japanese baby between 6 to 12, when they're babbling, may make that L sound. But because everybody around them isn't using that sound, it seems to get kind of pruned out. Like, you're not gonna need that one, so it gets cut out. So they have them all there. So if it's kind of a benefit if you grow up in a bilingual house, because you're picking up some extra phonemes along the way. So that's, you know, kind of a good thing. I don't know if you'd be able to pick up all of them. But again, that's a critical period for that. So that 6 to 12 months where, you know, you could figure out what songs you're gonna be able to make as an adult or whatever. So, yeah, so babies are able to communicate. The other thing that a newborn ability they have, besides the ability to cry in order to communicate, newborns are born with something called reflexes. Okay? Reflexes, they're almost like unconditioned responses, just at a greater scale or larger scale. A reflex is an unlearned automatic response.
An unlearned what response?
Unlearned automatic
Thank you.
response. Okay. The first two that are going to be important for feeding are called the rooting, R-O-O-T-I-N-G, rooting and sucking reflex. A rooting reflex, if you take a newborn and you touch their cheek, you automatically turn their head in that direction. If you touch their lips, that's the sucking reflex. They automatically pucker up and try to latch on to whatever is touching their lips. All right, so if you're breastfeeding or if you're bottle feeding, okay, the idea is the nipple hits the cheek, they turn in that direction, it crosses their lips, and they begin to pucker up and kind of latch on and begin feeding. Okay, so those are, you know, two of the important ones that that the child's born with to help them survive. Another one is the grasping reflex. If you're ever around a newborn, okay, you know, a couple months old, if you stick your finger in that child's hand, you'll stimulate the grasping reflex and they'll grasp onto it. And it's a really strong, powerful reflex.
Yeah, it is.
Okay? And the idea is this, that let's say the child's falling, okay, they slip out of somebody's arms, right? As their hands are going down, they might be able to grab on to whatever is there and break the fall. Okay? And it's really strong. I remember seeing in an old textbook, they took like a stick, like a pool cue almost, and they pressed it against, I don't remember how old it was. It wasn't a new, probably a couple month old neonate infant. And they pressed it against their palms. And they actually picked the stick up, and this is how strong the grip is, this grasping reflex, and they lifted the baby up off the table. Okay? So you can see like the feet off the table. Because we don't know what, the strength of all babies are. If you have a newborn, don't try that one at home. Okay? Just take my word for it that the grasping reflex is very strong. And once stimulated, it kind of helps out there. There's other reflexes that the babies are born with that we don't know what they're for. There's the Babinski sign. Babinski sign, Babinski is B-A-B-I-N-S-K-I. All right. If somebody strokes the bottom of your foot, your toes kind of curl up like that. With the Babinski sign with newborns, not all babies, but a lot of them, if you stroke their foot, their toes fan out. Okay. The other one is it's called the Moro reflex. It's almost like a startle response. If the baby's laying in a crib or a bassinet and he hears like a loud noise or is startled, it'll like throw its arms out like this and arch its back. Okay. Again, not quite sure what that's for, but it's one of the reflexes. So some of these reflexes help for survival, feeding, breaking a fall. Other ones we're not sure. But the most important thing is this, that as the child develops, what we want to see is between those 6 to 12 months, these reflexes going away. Okay? That's a sign that they're developing, that they're neurologically developing normal. You want to see those reflexes starting to go away. Okay? Instead of pressing their hand and getting the grasping reflex, you want to see them starting to reach for stuff, okay, and doing stuff more on their own. So you want to see those reflexes start to fade out, probably like 8 to 12 months. All right, pediatricians look for that to see if they're not just sort of responding, but they're actually doing stuff or whatever, putting stuff in their mouth and things like that instead of just responding. So those are two things with reflexes: help with survival, and then it kind of lets us know if neurologically development is occurring at a regular pace. Okay. All right. Now, in terms of like emotion, social emotional development with our newborns, one of the most important things that has to happen in terms of development, and here's the critical period again. This is like within the first year or two. If it doesn't happen here, it may not ever happen. Is that during that first year or two of life, a major socio-emotional milestone is that the child has to form a secure attachment. Okay, a secure attachment is a strong emotional bond with a caregiver. This is very important, and if it, like I said, if it doesn't happen in that first year or two, it may never happen. And it's very important because once you form this secure emotional bond, it allows you then to form relationships with other people as you develop. If you don't have this ability, okay, a lot of times, if we go back to chapter 14, a lot of times people have like an antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial is somebody who doesn't follow the rules. They're always getting in trouble with the law. It's never their fault. They don't do guilt. They don't care. They don't, they're very manipulative in order to survive. And a lot of times this we trace it back, it's because this person never formed a secure emotional bond. Okay? Think of poster child for this, somebody who would be a good example is you think back to Charles Manson. Okay? I don't know if you guys remember him or heard of him. Charles Manson created this, I guess, following back in the 60s, sort of like a hippie sort of movement. And he pretty much like brainwashed these people to go and start murdering wealthy people and write pigs on the wall and all this kind of stuff. But he was, his mother was a teenage prostitute, and he just bounced around from orphanage to orphanage and never was able to form a secure attachment. And then he grew up and, he would just manipulate people. He never murdered anybody. He just was able to get them to go out and do it for him. And, he did whatever he could to survive. And that's what happened. So these secure attachments are important for that. And they're also very important not only just for forming good social relationships later on in life, good healthy social relationships, these also impact, besides mental health, physical health. Physical health. So physically, it's very important that you form these bonds. One of the first people to study this was a guy named Harry Harlow, Harlow. Harry Harlow, back in the 1950s, I believe. He was at the University of Wisconsin. He was at Madison. Wasn't stuff. Yeah, but he was at University of Wisconsin, and he was studying attachment, but he was studying it in non-human primates. He was studying it in monkeys. And he did a couple very important experiments to show the importance of this attachment during development. Okay. One of them that he did is he took female monkeys when they were born. So these were like baby female monkeys. And he raised them himself. He isolated them from their biological mothers. So he put them in a cage, and he took care of them. He fed them and all that other stuff. Then he waited. Then when they were old enough to reproduce, he had them reproduce and have their own offspring. What he found was that these female monkeys, when they became mothers themselves, because they were deprived of having any kind of emotional attachment or secure attachment, that bond form, they actually then neglected and abused their own babies. It's almost like they didn't know how to form that attachment because they were, deprived of it. So they actually neglected and abused their own offspring. Now, the other experiment that Harlow did that was really important had to do with trying to determine what was more important, food or comfort for the infant. You gotta remember now, this is the 1950s, and there was still that strong influence of Freud. Freud was saying that the first, year and a half of life, the oral stage, feeding, that kind of stuff was most important. All right. So what Harlow did was this, to try to test that out. He had a bunch of infant monkeys, and he was raising them in probably like a room this size. So he had this group of infant monkeys, and he had two surrogate mothers, two substitute mother monkeys. And they were pretty much just like, imagine like a wire mesh torso, okay? A wire mesh torso. You had two of them, one over here on one side of the table, one over there. The one had where the breast would be, he had bottles where the infant monkeys could go feed off the bottles. The other one, he had this like big, heavy, like soft terry cloth blanket. All right, so one provided the food, the other one the comfort. So he wanted to see, all right, what happens, you know, what's more important in a, you know, kind of a crisis or anxiety, you know, situation for these baby monkeys. So they're in their, you know, collar, whatever. So he comes into the room and he puts on the floor this truck, toy truck, that had all these bright lights, super loud noises, and he kind of just lets it, you know, turns it on and it's going across the floor. You know, the little monkeys freak out. So he wanted to see where they were gonna go. Were they gonna run over to where the food was or run over to the blanket? Guess where they all ran to?
Blanket?
The blanket. Okay? They preferred that comfort contact over the food. Okay? Kind of went against what Freud was saying. And so he was showing, you know, early on that this was so important, this contact, that, you know, being able to form a bond, some sort of security or whatever, that it was very important. Although I did see this one time. If you ever get a chance, I don't know if it's still around, but there was a YouTube video, I'm gonna say maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It was in Florida. It was in Disney World. And they had a, like a family of, I think it was gorillas. And a snake got into their little domain where they were living. And so they were like all freaking out over it. Okay, it was like in the middle of the floor and they were all kind of like standing back looking at it or whatever. Well, eventually kind of crawled into the straw that they had there. And so some of them, you know, went and got like a stick and were like kind of poking at the straw or whatever. And then it jumped out, and they all kind of like jumped back. The biggest one there, you know, I would say like the father gorilla or whatever, the biggest guy in the group, when that happened, you know, they all kind of, like I said, sort of panicked or whatever. All right, this kind of went against Harlow, went back more toward Freud. He ran into a corner and grabbed a bunch of leaves and started eating them. Okay, so he was more comforted by the food. Right? So I thought that was kind of interesting when I saw that somebody was describing it to me, and I'm like, maybe as you get older, you know, they talk about like, was it comfort foods or something like that, like macaroni and cheese. Maybe there's, you know, maybe there's something here. We're on a continuum with actual tactile comfort versus food. One of the other funny videos I saw, I don't know if you guys ever saw this, was it was in a Cincinnati Zoo, maybe? No, I can't remember, but they had this display with these silverback gorillas, and there was a little kid there, and they dropped their stuffed animal into the area where the silverback gorillas were. And so, I don't know, it was like a teddy bear or stuffed bunny rabbit or something. And one of the gorillas walked over and picked it up. Okay, here you go, you're gonna whip out your cameras, right? Because this is gonna be a touching moment. The gorilla handing it back to the baby, or the child. The gorilla picked it up, held it up to like the child, and began ripping it to shreds in front of the kid. Was not what you were expecting. You know, it's like one of those things, almost like, don't you ever drop this stupid thing in my house again. You know, just tore it apart. So,
those are a couple interesting videos. So Harler was working with the non-human primates, working with monkeys. All right, same time period, 1950s. All right, there was kind of an experiment done with humans. Not a designed experiment, but it involved humans in orphanages. In the 1950s, there was a psychiatrist. His name was Dr. Rene Spitz. Right? Dr. Rene Spitz was a psychiatrist in England. His job was to go into the orphanages and make sure that all the children in there were being taken care of. So he'd go in there and assess them, make sure physically they were healthy and all this other stuff. Well, as he was going through these orphanages, and they were pretty much following the same standards or whatever, in some of the orphanages, the children were thriving. They were doing quite well. In some of the other orphanages, the children were actually sick and dying. Couldn't figure out what was the difference. So go back to chapter 1. He whipped out the old observational study, where you create a detailed record of behavior. And he did, that observational studies in the orphanages where the kids were thriving, and he did it in the ones where the kids were sickly and dying. The only difference he could find between the two orphanages was the ones where the kids were thriving, the caregivers, the nurses, whoever taking care of them, would hold the children for at least part of the day. In the other ones where the kids were sickly and dying, nobody was holding them. When it was like feeding time, they would prop the bottle up in the crib and prop the baby up in the corner or something like that so it could feed. But they just weren't being held. That was the only difference. He said where they weren't being held, he called that condition where they're sickly and dying. He said he called it hospitalism, because it was almost like super institutionalized. But the ones where the babies were being held, they were thriving. So we started to see the importance of this forming of attachment, okay? This contact, this comfort, and everything like that. And that's like I said, not for just mental health, but also for physical health. Now, the first person to actually study this in the lab was a psychologist, actually from Ohio. Her name was Mary Ainsworth. And she created a laboratory experiment called the strange situation. Right, this is how it would work. A mother would come in with their child. Their child was old enough to crawl. So we're thinking at least 12 to 18 months of age. All right, so the mother would come in with the child into the lab. They would sit down in a chair. Mother would put the baby on the floor, and the baby was allowed to, kind of crawl around, get used to its environment. Then what would happen are different scenarios or situations. Mom would get up and leave. Mom would come back. Mom would get up and leave. Like Mary Ainsworth would walk in. Mom would come back. In different, I forgot how many, they had a dozen of these different things of different. Mom leaving, coming back, somebody else coming in.
and they observe the baby's behaviors. What they found was that most of the children that they studied were securely attached. Now, what sort of characteristics were these? These were children that when the mom came into the room and put them on the floor, they weren't afraid to explore the room. They would occasionally glance back to make sure mom was still there. When mom would leave, the child would become a little bit upset. Upon mom's return, the child would go to the mother. All right? So that's a secure attachment. So that's what they identified as secure attachment. Comfortable to explore, upset when mom leaves, and then would go to mom upon her return, their return. Now there were two types of insecure attachments. One was called insecure avoidant. And pretty much, just to put in a nutshell, an insecure avoidant child was one who was like indifferent toward the mother. Like if mom left and came back, they could care less. Okay, they almost wanted nothing to do with the mother. That was the insecure avoidant. Then there's the other one was called insecure ambivalent. Now the insecure ambivalent, this is what would happen. If mom left and came back, the baby would start crawling toward the mother. If the mother reached for the child would immediately kind of scoot backward away and become upset. If the mother stopped, the child would start coming toward them, but if the mother again tried to reach down to pick up the child would like back up and become upset and run away. Okay? Ambivalent, when that term, what that means is you're like on the fence. You can't decide one way or the other. Should I go? Should I stay? That's why they call it insecure ambivalent. Remember the secure children, they would go to the mother. These children would start going toward the mother, but then kind of back up. Okay, go away. I've seen this in like some people's pets. You ever go to somebody's house, they got like a pet dog and it comes, greet you at the door and it's barking, its tail's wagging, and then you reach down to pet it and the thing just gets like, snaps at you and backs up or whatever. I never could understand that. I mean, it's like, it's not, it seems like it's friendly, like it wants to be pet or something like that, but man, the minute you stick your hand down to pet it, it's like sticking a blowtorch in its face or something, just like becomes very upset. I've seen this also to like people who have pet cats. You'll go over their house and you'll be sitting there, for a while talking or whatever. Let's say the cat was sleeping or hiding under the bed or something like that. Well, the cat comes out and it starts rolling on the floor, a few feet away from you. So you see it there. Now, my thinking is this, and maybe I'm just not a good animal person. I'm thinking it wants to get maybe pet or rubbed on the belly a little bit or something like that, because it's like rolling around stretching. Okay. Am I missing something?
Mm-mm.
So then you reach over to pet it or touch it. And I don't know how they do this, but it always seems to be like a half a millimeter away from the tip of your finger. So you think, oh, okay. don't know if anybody could guess what's gonna happen. I'll just get up out of my chair and I'll go over and pet it.
What does the cat do?
Leaves.
Pardon me?
So, leaves.
Exactly. Back under the bed.
Yeah, what the did you want me to do? You know, what was that all about? I can't ever put two and two together. You know, again, maybe I'm just bad with animals, or I don't know. But I mean, I would, you know, try and oblige you. It looks like you want to get pet. The same with those barking dogs. You know, its tail's wagging. You know, the ears aren't back. It seems friendly. Then it's like, how you doing? And then, you know, it just comes flying back like the ambivalent child or whatever. Okay. All right. So they started to identify these. Now, what they were trying to figure out then is, after this type of research, you know, Ainsworth, same time period, 50s, 60s, started doing this stuff. They wanted to figure out, all right, so this secure attachment, it seems a little bit, you know, it seems like it's very important and each, you know, healthy thing or whatever. How do we do it? How do we create a secure attachment? Well, the research that shed some light on this was studying something else, but it kind of circled back to this whole secure attachment thing. There was a group of researchers, last name was White and others, and Professor White went into nursery schools. This is back in the 60s. Nursery schools are similar like preschool or something like that, but nursery schools, you know, they weren't public. You had to have a few bucks to go and put your kid in nursery school. And they're like 3 or 4-year-olds. So they were going in there doing observational study, you know, look at kids and how they behave. And they identified some of the children in this nursery school as being very socially competent. They had good social skills. And they called these children the A children, the letter A. And what I mean, they had good social skills or socially competent. These kids knew how to, you know, they listened to the teacher, they shared their toys, they shared their snacks, you know, they took turns, they waited in line, okay? Good skills, almost like little social leaders that help out the teacher and stuff like that. Then they also identified the C children, the letter C. And these were children who were socially incompetent. They lacked social skills. Never listened to the teacher, stole other kids' snacks. If a kid was playing with a toy that they wanted, they would take it away from them, or, you know, fight, whatever. I don't know if there were B children, ones in the middle, but I remember the A and the C children. So anyway, they wanted to figure out, all right, you know, how these kids develop. So they they took a look at parenting style. And they watched the mothers of these different children and how they interacted, you know, with their kids. You know, especially if they had like younger brothers and sisters, they could, you know, that'd be helpful. That's a lot of times too, like with nursery schools. Back when I was growing up there, the families were much bigger, and I guess if you could afford to put them in nursery school for a few days, because you had younger brothers and sisters that allowed the mother to, you know, pay attention to them. Kind of thing. But anyway, so they went back in, they're checking this out. What they found out was this, all right? The A children, the letter A children, those who had the good social skills, socially competent, they had what White and others called super moms. Super moms just knew how to interact with their children. They weren't like helicopter moms or anything like that. They could read the room, basically, is what it comes down to. So if they had like a couple month old child laying in the crib cooing, they would go over and talk to the child.
because they knew that, you know, it's an early form of communication. Okay, they were able to tell those different crying noises. Uh-oh, somebody's hungry, you know, that kind of thing. So they're pretty good at picking up on these cues. The mothers of the sea children, they called them zookeeper moms. Zookeeper moms. All right? And the reason they call them that is because they took good physical care of the children. The children were fed and, you know, had clean clothes and all that kind of stuff. But they had no clue how to interact with them. If you see like a little baby or a little kid doing this, what does this tell you that they're what? They're tired, right? Okay. Zookeeper mom. The kid's doing that. So what do? They walk over, grab the kid by the armpits, like underneath, like, who wants to play with mommy? Who wants it? You know, and then, so the kid starts crying. It's like, okay, fine. They put the baby down and they pull out their phone. I'm just gonna play solitaire then. Okay. No clue, right? That kid was tired. Probably didn't want to play or whatever. Right. So this is how they, you know, started to figure out what led to competent, incompetent, and also saw that this also led to the secure versus insecure attachment, the same sort of stuff. All right. So the bottom line, I've been talking about this stuff for a little while. Bottom line, the thing I want you to take away from this is if you want to create a secure attachment, if you're a parent, caregiver, you want to create the secure attachment, all you have to do is be warm and responsive. If you're neglectful or unresponsive, that leads to an insecure attachment. And by the way, you don't have to be perfect. They've done research where if you're warm and responsive like 40% of the time with the child, that's still going to lead to a secure attachment. Okay, nobody's asking you to, you know, be 100% on that. So if you're 40% warm and responsive, that's going to lead to a secure attachment. Okay, if you lack those abilities, if you're unresponsive, neglectful, kind of cold, just don't get it, that will lead to one of the insecure attachments. Okay, there's been other ones besides the avoidant and ambivalent identified over time. All right, so that's, like I said, huge milestone. Very important you form that attachment because, yeah, like I said, in terms of physical health, mental health, social relationships down the road, that's, you know, going to set the foundation for all that kind of stuff. And if you know, doesn't happen, you know, you get the people who develop, like I said, sort of like an antisocial personality disorder where they really just can't bond. And that's why too, I give sometimes parents credit, you know, a lot of credit, who adopt children out of orphanages who are like older. Because odds are they may not form that bond with them, okay? That critical period may have passed, and they're just, you know, pouring out pure love and may not get nothing back in return. So that, like I said, I admire people like that, so that they're willing to do that. All right. All right. Now, we talked about the importance of social-emotional development, forming this bond, some of the other important things that have to take place. The next thing I wanted to cover has to do with cognitive development. all those cognitive skills, being able to think and make decisions and all that stuff. The most famous theory of cognitive development was proposed by actually a Swiss biologist. His name was Jean Piaget. Piaget. Swiss biologist named Jean Piaget. And he developed this theory of cognitive development, not in a laboratory, but from just interacting with his children and their friends. He would watch them play, he would interview them, he would give them different sort of problems or puzzles, and he wasn't so much interested in if they were able to solve them. But what he was interested in was how they went about, what was their thinking. And he said that from birth to adolescence and beyond, there were 4 stages that people went through in terms of cognitive development. There was the sensory motor stage, that was birth to 2 years of age. There was the pre-operational stage, age is 2 to 7 years of age, 2 to 7.
Say that again.
Pardon me?
Can you say that again?
Yeah. Pre-operational stage, that's ages 2 to 7. Sensory motor, birth to 2 years. Then there's concrete operations, ages 7 to 11. And then there's formal operations, that's the 4th one, formal operations, and that's 11 and older. 11 and older. Could happen when you're in adolescence, could happen in young adulthood. Some people don't even develop that level of thinking, formal operations. Now, at the heart of his theory, heart of Piaget's theory, there's some certain concepts I want you guys to understand, because these are going to, with each stage, this is going to be a major influence. Now, his approach was this. He believed that children were almost like little scientists. And like little scientists, they had like a hypothesis or a theory, and they would test it out. They would be always testing it out. Okay, so you saw them as like mini scientists. So keep that in mind. Now, as part of his theory or thinking, he said that we had something called schemas or schemes. I think your book refers to them as schemas. S-C-H-E-M-A. And a schema is basically a mental structure we use to organize information. So we have different schemas that we all use. I mean, even as adults, we use these. So for example, if I told you, tomorrow I'm gonna go to a birthday party for a 3-year-old. As soon as I say a birthday party for a 3-year-old, what are you picturing in your head? What's gonna be there?
Screaming.
Pardon me?
Screaming.
Okay, screaming.
Cake.
Cake. Okay.
Balloons.
Balloons, I was picturing balloons. Other children. If you're coming to my party, you better be bringing one of these. A gift or presents. Maybe other adults. Other types of food, maybe pizza or something like that. Right? That would be a schema for a 3-year-old's birthday. If I said, after class today, I'm gonna treat everybody to, McDonald's, we're gonna go to McDonald's. So you pull up your McDonald's schema, all right? We're gonna go in there, we're gonna place our order. It's gonna go on a plastic tray. We're gonna sit down at a booth made out of formica and vinyl, eat our food. When we're done, if we're good patrons, go over to the thing that has the plastic plant, push our stuff in the garbage, and stick our tray on top and leave. Okay, yep. Different schemes or whatever. Okay? Now, what's gonna happen is we have these mental structures, and sometimes new information is gonna come in. And we're either gonna be able to assimilate that information in, so it fits into our schema, or we have to accommodate. Accommodate means change it. All right, so we have our McDonald's schema, and if we all go into the restaurant after class, we walk in, and somebody greets us and says, "How many today?" It's like, whoa, wait, what? And we get seated, and they hand us menus, and somebody comes and takes our order. It's like, wow, this is something different. Gotta see if this will fit into our existing schema. Maybe I need to change it. Or if I go to that 3-year-old's birthday tomorrow, and instead they're giving us gifts, and they have a birthday pie, and wow, this is different. This isn't what I was expecting. So we may have to change it or assimilate it. Okay. So Piaget says that children have these schemas, and as information comes in, they either have to, fit it in, or they have to change it. So we were talking before, let's say a newborn, all right? A newborn may have a sucking schema, where they believe if anything touches their lips, they're able to suck on it. So if, let's say, they start off and they're being breastfed, okay, they do that for some months, and at some point it switches over to a bottle. Right, bottle's got the nipple on it and stuff like that, a little bit different. But baby quickly picks up on it and assimilates that into their sucking scheme. Yeah, everything's still suckable. Sending with a pacifier, their toe, whatever, they stick it in my neck and suck it. All right, so they're assimilating all that stuff into the sucking scheme. That started off with just maybe breastfeeding, now the bottles, binkies, what have you. Now they get a hold of a piece of baking chocolate. Did you ever taste baking chocolate? It has no sugar in it. It's almost like, tastes like coffee grounds or something. It just is not good. It's very bitter. When I was a kid, my mom had a big chunk of that chocolate. And she told us, don't ever eat this. We just, figured this, my brothers and sisters, typical, not allowed to eat whatever. Just like we're not allowed to eat whipped cream out of the, can or spray it in our mouth or whatever, just mom being mom. So one day,
she was downstairs washing clothes or something, and it was a nice day, and I went in the cabinet, and I broke off a piece of that thing, and put it in a way, and I ran outside and went behind the garage and stuffed the whole thing in my mouth. I thought it was gonna puke. It was just like, you know, whatever. And I'm thinking, oh man, it's like God punished me because I didn't listen to my mom or something like that. But it's gross or whatever. Right? It's not like, it looks like a giant Hershey bar, but it does not taste like it. So let's say a baby gets a piece of that, puts it in their mouth, God, they spit it out. All right, no, not everything that goes against their lips or goes in their mouth is suckable. That is not a good thing. So now they have to accommodate. They have to change that schema. Okay? Not everything that goes into my mouth is suckable. Okay? Something like that, if they got a pencil they were sucking on or something, you know, just bitter or yuck, you gotta change it. All right? Same thing. A child, let's say, has a pet kitty. And they're like, you know, 2.5, 3 years old or something like that. And they call every four-legged furry animal kitty. Okay, kitty. So they go to the zoo, and I think if you go into one entrance, I think like the lions are like the first thing you see. I think the way they have it set up. So they go in there and they see the lions, and the child says, kitty. And the parents, you know, they say, oh yeah, that's a big kitty. That's a big kitty, right? It looks different than their cat, but they're able to assimilate it into their kitty schema. Yeah, that's a kitty. Okay. One time when this was years ago, I said, we're there watching, you know, looking at the lions or something like that, and this squirrel ran in there, and one of these lions got a hold of the squirrel, starts whipping it back and forth in its head and stuff like that. And this lady next to me, she's like, somebody's got to go in there and help it. And I'm like, all right, ma'am, I'll help you over the rail here. Just be really careful with that lion, because you know, it's got these big sharp. I didn't know what you expected anybody to do at that point. I felt bad for the squirrel, because he's like getting eaten by a lion. He's in Cleveland, Ohio. It's probably the last thing he thought would ever happen to him. But like I said, it was kind of a crazy situation. All right, so now the child goes down to the next display, and let's say it's wolves, and the child says kitty, and the parents are like, no, that's a wolf, that's more like a doggy. Okay, and it goes down to the polar bear, it says kitty, no, that's a bear. So now there's all this new information coming in, and so not every four-legged animal that has fur is a kitty. So they have to change it. So Piaget says this is going on constantly through development, okay? And at some point in time, it'll all make sense, okay? And he says at those points in time, it's called equilibration, okay? An equilibration where everything kind of all fits in usually happens at the end of one of those stages I told you about. Then development occurs, and there's like a new way of thinking, and they kind of have to blow that up, and they start creating new schemas, and they go through the process again of assimilation, accommodation, and they go through the next stage. Okay. Let me stop here for a little bit, kind of. Bless you.
Thank you.
And think about maybe some schemas you've had growing up that you had to accommodate or change along the way. And then we will come back around, give us one time.
10:27.
How about like 20 till? So I want to wrap this up, and I want to review with you guys for next week. So let me get through Piaget. So yeah, be back around 22 or so. Any questions? All right.
So far, so good.
Be careful of those lions out.
thought you took it to.
No, you should do it, I mean, I just started to get on a roll.
Don't take it to it.
But no, thank you. I'll probably do it. Yes, I can.
Thank you. Take it to statistics, but I gotta take history class with it. I would never shorten the math class, and I would never take two classes with math class.
Is that the one where like, was it 1410 and 970? I think you have to take
I hate that. You know what? I would never ever do it. Short. I should read it, so it's like 16 and 14. And it created such a rush to get all of my head done that I still have to continue to keep on.
Yeah, I think 970 is a co-requisite of 1410. Like, I'm gonna have to do that.
Well, get as much time as possible.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay,
You can then you take statistics.
yeah, yeah.
Got some notes on it.
Okay. Yeah,
That and the get the calculator helps a lot.
okay.
Helps a whole lot to get that because the majority of the times you can do a lot of the programs, a lot of the work on the calculator, but they want you to learn how to do it by hand and the calculator. Not my favorite class. Okay. I did take it online, so it's not like I had a teacher to help. So.
Okay, yeah, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm obviously waiting till the last second, but.
Yeah. The tutors here are great. They really are. They've helped me to learn a lot. And I think one of them, his name is Mike. I feel bad for him because like I make him break it down to like the simplest form. So I'm sure he has a headache, but he's doing a really good job.
That's good. Yeah. Just matters that you understand it.
believes that most of the thinking that takes place in the first 2 years of life is done through sensory, your senses, and motor. Motor referring to like your actions. So that's why it's called sensory motor stage. And so the three things that are going to happen during this stage is you're going to go from becoming a passive responder to an active participant in your environment. You're going to go from a passive responder to an active participant. Like I said, instead of just pressing something into your palm and you grasp onto it, that's a passive responder. You're going to become an active participant and you're going to try to reach to grab it. Okay? So that's going to be one of the things that are going to happen during the sensory motor stage. One of the big changes. The second thing that's going to happen is you're going to develop object permanence. Did anybody drive to school today?
Yeah.
Can you see your vehicle from here?
No.
Does it still exist?
Yes.
Okay. Understanding that even though you can't see it or perceive it, and it still exists, is called object permanence. Children do not have this ability. They start developing it probably between ages 8 to 12 months.
You said 12
So-
to 8 months?
Between 8 to 12 months, they start to develop it. So if you have a child who's maybe 7, 8 months of age, and they're playing with like a little toy in their crib, and the toy falls out through the bars and falls on the floor, to that child, that toy no longer exists. All right, keep this in mind as a parent. All right, if they see their mother, they're gonna want mom to pick them up or whatever. However, if mom leaves the room, mom no longer exists. Now, she can't talk or whatever, but she quietly leaves during that first 8 months or so. Okay. There's no object permanence at that point in time. And it happens like gradually. So if we had a toy right in front of like a child who's less than 8 months of age, and we hid it from them, like hid it under a blanket, it's gone. Disappeared. Now as they get older, like 8 to 12 months or so, if you take that same toy and hide it, okay, they'll go to look for that toy in the spot that you hid it. Okay, they're starting to develop it. Okay, and so it happens very gradually until they get to the very end of the stage. The third thing that's going to develop is something called symbolic thinking. Symbolic thinking. And this is the ability to form mental representations of objects or actions. So children are going to have this at the end of the sensory motor period. Right? They're like 2 years old, so they're starting to talk. Language shows that they have symbolic thinking. So if you could make a sound or a gesture or say a word that's going to represent an action or object, that's symbolic thinking. Okay. Another one is like symbolic play. If the child's able to take like this cup, pretend it's a rocket ship.
They're forming a mental representation. So at these stages, if you notice, you start off with this little, baby who cries and has these reflexes. By the time you get done, you have all these new sets of skills. So all the schemas, have to change and everything like that. They can think symbolically, they can, do different things. So they're going now into the second stage, pre-operations, and they have this symbolic thinking now. Okay? They could form mental representations. They could be 3 years old, sitting in another room and think about, I think I want a cookie. And they'll come into the kitchen and announce, I'd like a cookie. Prior to this, in sensory motor stage, the only time they would want one is they saw you having one. Okay, they're gonna come up with this on their own. So now they can use this symbolic thinking. Huge advancement. Okay, object permanent symbolic thinking. Now, in pre-operations, there are some limitations to the thinking. Number one, children in pre-operations are unable to think logically. Very limited understanding of cause and effect. They have what's called intuitive thinking. Intuitive thinking. Intuitive thinking means that if two events occurred close together in time, one must have caused the other. They have intuitive thinking, which means that if two events occurred close together in time, one must have caused the other. This is a pre-operation 2 to 7, folks. So if you had like a kid in kindergarten, they got in trouble, they were put in timeout because they were acting bad, then they come home and then they find out their baby brother or sister, whatever, is sick, right? They're gonna think, well, because I was bad in school, this must cause this other bad thing to happen. The second limitation, besides not being able to really think logically, is that children in pre-operations, ages 2 to 7, their thinking tends to be what they call egocentric. Egocentric. Egocentric, what this means is they believe everybody sees the world the way they do. Today is a 5-year-old's birthday, so without FaceTime or Teams or any of those other things, grandma calls from California, and mom or dad hands the phone to the 5-year-old whose birthday is today. And so grandma's on the other line and asks, how old are you today? Okay. Here's where that egocentric thinking comes in. They hold up 5 fingers, because if they could see them, grandma could see them. Okay? That's the thinking. If you're watching TV and they step in front of the TV, they stop to watch what you're watching, and you say, I can't see the TV, they will go a step closer, because they think if they could move closer and see it better, you could see it better. Okay? They're seeing everything, from their perspective. Okay? Why does it become night outside? Well, so I can go to bed. Why do you have to go to bed? Because I have to go to sleep. Well, why do you have to go to sleep? So Santa Claus brings me presents at Christmas time.
Okay, everything kind of focuses upon, you know, them. They're not egotistical, but they see the world, you know, from their perspective. They think everybody also sees the same thing that they're seeing. All right, so you have that egocentric thinking. The other thing is that Piaget noted was that children in pre-operations, they don't understand the concept of conservation. Okay, that although appearance may change, appearance of an object may change, okay, the object itself may stay the same. I hop on the scale, I look, oh wow, 212 pounds. I don't want to be this heavy. So I get off the scale and I do one of those vacuums where I let all the air out of my stomach and I suck it in as much as I can to make myself, I don't know, look skinny or something. I'm gonna get back on the scale, how much am I gonna weigh?
Same.
The same, okay? That's conservation. That's understanding that even though I went and made myself look skinnier or went and got a girdle or something like that, I'm still gonna weigh the same. Understanding that although appearance changes, okay, the quantity and many of the characteristics stay the same. Okay, they're fooled by appearance is what the basic understanding is. Okay. So if you have a child who's 2 to 7, or a niece or nephew or something like that, you can sort of test this out and it's not gonna harm them in any way. If you show them, like, if you get, let's say 2 cans of Play-Doh, the exact same color, let's keep it the same. So let's say you get 2 blue ones, okay? And you show it to the child right in front of them. And you say, you know, are these exactly the same? They would say yes. Okay. Then you take one of them and you roll it into a big long snake. Now you ask them, are they the same? They will say no. They're like, what's the difference? They'll say this one's bigger because it's longer. Okay. Do it all right in front of them. Or you could take, excuse me. You could take 2 short glasses of water, okay? Ask them if it's the same amount in each glass, and they'll say yes. They're filled to the exact same part. You take one of the glasses and you dump it into this taller bottle, all right? Ask them which one has more. They'll say this one. And if you ask why, they'll say because it's taller. They're fooled by the appearance, okay? These changes, and then you do them right in front of them. Okay? They just have a hard time thinking in more than one dimension at one time. Okay? That's why they don't. I mean, some kids can grasp it. I've seen. I had kids come into my child growth and development. We tested it out. Some of them get it, some of them don't, or whatever. But for the most part, there's gonna be some limitations. Piaget, he had like 5 or 6 of them, like conservation of length, conservation of mass, conservation of volume, and so on, different conservation of number, and he'd test them out. And he's, you know, young children or whatever, okay? So those are the limitations of pre-operation. They develop this great skill, this symbolic thinking, able to form these mental representations, but they really can't think logically about them. They're limited in their thinking, being more egocentric, seeing everything and everybody sees everything the same way they do. Okay. The way Piaget did that for the children, figured out that egocentric thinking. He actually had 3 mountains, but I'll just use these 3 objects. So he took kids who were in pre-operation,
And he had them sit, on this side of the table, and, he had three mountains. He had a tall one, a medium-sized one, and then a short one. And he asked the child, all right, which side, is the tallest going on? And the child would say this side, which one medium, and then shortest. So they understood, okay? Then he had them go around to the other side of the table and look at the mountains again from that side. And, they described the tallest one is gonna be on your right, we got the medium one in the middle, and then the shortest one is gonna be on your left. Okay, they understood that. So then he pulls out a doll. He has the child sit on this side of the table, describe that the largest one is on their left, and the medium one in the middle, shortest one on the right. He has the child go to the other side of the table, puts the doll in the chair that they were just sitting in, and says, all right, now how does the doll see these mountains? And the child described it from the way that they were looking at them, not from the perspective of the doll. Okay? They just lacked that ability. Okay? And so they lacked that egocentric ability, and they lacked the ability to understand conservation. That even though the appearance changes, okay, that's why like kids get scared sometimes, like around Halloween. If you dress up like the werewolf, they don't understand that you're still the same person, just wearing a werewolf costume or something like that. They get kind of confused because they're fooled by those changes in appearance. Now we get into concrete operations, ages 7 to 11. All right, it's called concrete operations because children during this time start to understand different types of operations. Okay, like the ones that you'll maybe encounter in math class. For example, 2 plus 7 equals 9, which means that 9 minus 7 equals 2. 2 times 9 equals 18. 18 divided by 9 equals 2. They understand the concept of reversibility. So if you take a child who's in concrete operations, they understand that now, and you do that Play-Doh trick with them, where you show them 2 identical blue Play-Dohs just taken out of the can. You ask them, is there the same, in amount here? Are these the same? They say yes. You take the one, you roll it into a big long snake. You ask them which one has more. They'll say it's still the same. And they'll take that snake and they'll roll it back up to the same size it was and show you that they're the same. And the same thing with the water. You show them the 2 glasses, same amount in each of these. They'll say, yeah. You take it and you pour it into a tall, skinny one. They'll ask which one has more. Well, they're the same. They'll take this tall, skinny one. They'll put it back in the glass you poured it out of. Okay, they understand these operations now. They're being able now to understand logic, cause and effect. They're also able, usually in concrete operations, to start to classify objects, categorize them. A lot of times, like kids during this time, 7 to 11, they start to collect things, and they can start classifying like the different Pokemon cards and the different Yu-Gi-Oh cards or manga books or whatever they're into. They start to put them into different categories. I can't remember how the Pokemon break down the different ones or whatever. Was it water type, fire type, my son collected them, but that's like 20 some years ago. I can't remember. But anyway, they're able to start to classify and categorize things. Okay, so big advancement. Okay, they're able to, like I said, start to understand logic, understand these operations, use these operations to solve problems, start to classify, categorize things. Now we get to the fourth, the final category. formal operations. And here's where children begin to think abstractly, all right? In concrete operations, they can only understand the stuff that's right in front of them, stuff that was in categories, classifications, all right? Now you're starting to get out of that realm. All right? For example, like if I said to you guys, can a good person do something evil? Can a good person mess
Yeah.
up and do something evil?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can an evil person actually go and do something good?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Those are like two opposites. Somebody in concrete operations would not understand it. They would have it like broke down: bad people, good people. Okay. But as you get into formal operations, you start thinking about stuff. It's like, yeah, you know, you can be a good and bad person at the same time, or a bad and good. You know, you start to think in these terms. You start to think in what if type of terms. All right, you're getting into like adolescence, so you start thinking about your life. And what am I going to be? You know, how's this going to go? What kind of vocation am I going to get into? What am I going to do? You start thinking about these what if type questions. All right, the major development that's going to occur in formal operations, and again, it may not occur for everybody or at the same time. According to Piaget, is that these young people are going to develop hypothetical, deductive reasoning. The way he did this is he used what was called the pendulum problem. All right? Pendulum is he had like a long string, and he had like a weight attached to the bottom. And his question was this: what would create the longest period? Okay, period meant the longest distance that the string would travel back and forth. And he gave the young people 4 options. Okay, they can make it longer, or they can make it shorter. They could change the weight at the end, make it heavier or lighter. They can start the swing from different levels, and they can also change the force in which they start the swing. Now, even though you may not know the answer, okay, here's the important thing. If you were to coach me, and I gave you this problem, I says, yeah, my professor wants me to know what's going to create the longest period on this swing, the greatest distance it's going to travel. He said I could change the length, I could change the weight at the end, I could change the height where I start the swing from, or I could change the force that I use. Now, even though you may not be a physics major or anything like that, if I'm not sure how to go about organizing how to figure this out, and I come to you and I say, how should I do this? How should I figure this out? Just in your own common sense terms, how should I do it?
Put a heavier weight on it and start it from a higher position.
Should I do them at the same time?
Yes.
Okay, she says do it at the same time. Anybody else think differently? You guys know the answer. I mean, this isn't, I know it's called hypothetical deductive reasoning, but it's something you do all the time. You would test them out one at a time, right? Okay, she gave her 2 suggestions, but if you're doing them at the same time, you're not going to be sure which one actually caused it to happen. So the, correct way we would do this is probably just do it one at a time. It's actually the length of the string is gonna increase the period. But you have to do it one at a time. You do this every day in your life. If something's not working with your car, you check different things out until you figure out the problems, right? If you got some kind of medical condition going on, all right, you go to the doctors and they start ruling stuff out and figuring out what it is, okay? That's the same thing. That's, you don't announce it. Every time it rains, I got water in my basement. I think I'm gonna use hypothetical deductive reasoning and figure this out. No, you're gonna, try to figure out, is it the gutters are maybe overflow with leaves and I get all this water hitting the foundation? Is there a crack in the foundation? Are the drain tiles around the foundation blocked? You go through and you start to figure out one thing at a time what the answer is, okay? And that's something that's like a hallmark or characteristic of formal operations, okay? Being able to use this. And as I said, I gave you this weird problem about the string, so it's like, but in real life, you do this all the time when you're trying to figure out the answers for stuff, okay? You're signing up for classes, you look which ones, okay, I gotta take this class, and you start going one by one to see which ones are available, and you sign up for them. We do it like nonstop. But you don't develop this ability until you hit formal operations. And Piaget says that once you've developed this ability, you're fully developed. So a 15-year-old who can use hypothetical deductive reasoning is no different than the 45-year-old.
Interesting.
Okay. But what's the difference between a 45-year-old and a 15-year-old when it comes to figuring things out? They both have hypothetical deductive reasoning, but what is the advantage the 45-year-old probably has over the 15-year-old?
He's done it more often.
Pardon me?
He's done it more often.
Done it more often, so they have more experience or knowledge, yeah. Okay. That's, like I said, that's, the difference, because the other thing that starts to happen is, when you're an adolescent or you're in college, young adult, you're just learning stuff, okay? You're more or less kind of a receptacle that's taking in the knowledge. Once you get out of school and stuff like that, then you have to start applying it to different situations. So that's where you start developing more of this experience of how to, apply it and things like that. So that makes the difference, okay? In terms of the abilities or whatever. I should say basic abilities the same, but, having a little more savvier experience makes a difference. Okay. Any questions about that? All right.
You said under concrete operations to understand the concept of what? I missed that.
You say understand operations, and logic, start to understand cause and effect, and they start to understand different types of operations, like reversibility.
Thank you.
Also, they're able to classify and categorize information.
And that's the concrete?
Concrete, correct.
Thank you.
So out of chapter 9, know the definition of developmental psychology.
Can you say that again, please?
Sure. Chapter 9, know the definition of developmental psychology. When you began your life, you were a single cell. And what were you called?
Zygote.
So know that one. When you began your life, you were a single cell. What you were called then. I want you to know how many chromosomes each parent contributes at fertilization or conception. How many chromosomes does each parent contribute? During what prenatal stage do all the organ systems develop? During which one of the 3 prenatal stages do all the organ systems develop? True or false, dominant and recessive genes are both examples of alleles? True or false? Both dominant and recessive genes are examples, well, dominant and recessive genes are examples of alleles, A-L-L-E-L-E-S. A-L-L-E-L-E-S. Know the definition of the term teratogen. What is a teratogen? T-E-R-A-T-O-G-E-N. Know the difference between the rooting and sucking reflex? Know the difference between the rooting, R-O-O-T-I-N-G, rooting and sucking reflex? Know what leads to a secure attachment and what leads to an insecure attachment? Know what leads to a secure attachment and what leads to an insecure attachment? Know what a schema is? Know what a schema is? Know the order of Piaget's stages? Know the order of his stages, those 4 stages? If a child's playing with a toy and they lose it, and the toy no longer exists, know what stage of development they're in? Child's playing with the toy, they lose it, the toy no longer exists. What stage of development are they in? This one's out of the book. Know what the adolescent growth spurt is? Adolescent growth spurt. Adolescent growth spurt. According to Erik Erikson, we have a 9-year-old. They're doing okay in school. They're getting B's and some C's. However, the parents are very critical of their grades. So you got a 9-year-old getting B's and some C's in school. Parents
mom, dad, whoever is very critical of their grades. Don't think these are good. According to Eric Erickson, this child is at risk for developing a sense of what? According to Eric Erickson, this child is at risk for developing a sense of what? It's a 9-year-old, B's and C's in school, parents super critical. Erickson says, you gotta be careful because this child may develop a sense of blank. All right, so this is how you're gonna figure this out. Erickson studied under Freud. Remember Freud had those psychosexual stages, the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Where Erickson, he broke it down into 8 stages. It covered the entire lifespan. And what he said is that what happens at each stage, there's a psychosocial crisis, and you have to resolve that, okay? And so like his first stage is trust versus mistrust, the first year of life. And you gotta leave the first year of life with kind of a sense of trust, like the world is okay, I'll be taken care of. You gotta have some mistrust, because you can't just be gullible and, do what everybody tells you. Same thing, like, the second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt, 1 to 3 years of age. You start developing autonomy, but you can't do everything yourself, okay? You can't pour a gallon of milk into a bowl of cereal if you're between ages 1 and 3. It's gonna turn into a disaster. So there's gonna be a little bit of doubt. So at each of these stages, all right, you're gonna have this crises, blank versus blank. So find out where the 9-year-old lands and take a look at the crises, and you'll figure out what's gonna happen if the parents are super critical. Okay. Next one, during what stage of life does anxiety about death and dying increase? During what stage of life does anxiety about death and dying increase? And at what stage of life does it decrease? In what stage of life does concerns about death and dying increase? And during what stage of life does it decrease? All right, there's 3 types of parenting styles. There's 3 types. There's authoritative, authoritarian, and then there's permissive. Permissive parenting styles where children have lots of rights, very few responsibilities. Pretty much can do whatever they want. Which I found is a very bad style. Like over the years, I've known people kids who grew up with this type of parenting style. And there's like so many of them like died young, either just never took care of themselves or ran into health issues, or they overdosed, or they committed suicide or whatever. So, I hate punishing kids, but at the same time, just over the years, I've seen that be a good style. But what I want you to know is the difference between the authoritative parenting style and the authoritarian parenting style. All right, that was it for chapter 9. Out of chapter 10, know the definition of the term sex differences. You hear the terms thrown around all the time, gender differences, sex differences. Well, there's a difference between those differences. So I want you to know, what is the definition of sex differences? Somebody's referring to sex differences. What are they talking about? The next one I want you to know out of chapter 10 is sexual orientation. Now I know what most of you guys are thinking. Oh, that's pretty easy. I was tutoring one time. I was tutoring somebody who was like 18 or 19 years old. And I said, okay, so what kind of questions you want to know? Well, what does this mean, sexual orientation? And I thought to myself, you know what, I gotta make sure that all my students know what that means when they leave my class. Even though I don't think it's obvious, because people talk about this all the time. So know the definition of sexual orientation. The third one out of chapter 10, according to social learning theory. According to social learning theory, how are gender roles developed? According to social learning theory, how are gender roles, R-O-L-E-S, how are gender roles developed? Out of chapter 13, know the definition of the term stress. Imagine you're driving on the 480 bridge and you get in an accident and your car's dangling over the edge of that bridge. I think that's like the tallest bridge in this area, if I'm not mistaken. And it takes them like 6 hours to get you out of the car. Would you consider that prolonged stress?
Yes.
I'd be pretty stressed out. When you're under prolonged stress like that, when you're under prolonged stress, your hypothalamus, remember part of your brain, your old hypothalamus, will signal your pituitary gland. When you're under prolonged stress, the hypothalamus will signal the pituitary gland to release what hormone? When you're under prolonged stress, the hypothalamus, your part of your brain, will tell the pituitary gland to release what hormone? Next one. There's something called the General Adaptation Syndrome. GAS, General Adaptation Syndrome. Again, when you're under stress, this General Adaptation Syndrome kind of kicks in. It's got like 3 stages. You go through alarm. Okay, let's say it's something like you were just told you're losing your job, or maybe a spouse or somebody in a relationship for a long time just suddenly left you, okay? That triggers this alarm stage. You're kind of like freaking out, not sure what you're gonna do or whatever. Then you're gonna go into the resistance stage. Okay? In that stage, your body systems are like working overtime just to keep you normal. And then you get into the 3rd stage, exhaustion. Exhaustion is where, you know, your body organs just start to break down. Your immune structures, your adrenal gland, you get ulcers, you know, that stuff starts to happen. Okay? So be familiar with the General Adaptation Syndrome and what happens in each of those stages. All All right, we'll see you next Saturday then, we'll wrap this up. I'll review. You guys have any questions, I'll answer those, you guys take the test. And looks like the weather should be okay for December, so it's not July, but hey, take over the weekend. So have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.